Thanks so much for having this chat. And I guess we're going to rehash a lot of our very long conversation the other day, but I thought it was so worth recording because it was such an interesting conversation. Um, so first of all, I just wanted to hand off to you and just say, can you introduce who you are?
All right. Well, thanks for having me first, Krista. It was really nice to meet you. My name is Vivian Cheng, and long story short, I was born and raised in Beijing and moved to North America for university and kind of been out and about since then. I have been doing marketing and PR for Bitcoin related companies for the past 2 years. And in the past 6 months, I've been hosting and producing my own Bitcoin podcast called Live with Bitcoin. So I haven't been around for an awful lot of time compared to many of you, but many of your audience. But I've had the most incredible experience already. And every day I wake up, there's a sense of purpose. There's a sense of what can I do today to contribute. So I definitely feel very lucky to be in this community.
Yeah, I mean, I will say after chatting to you before that, I think you're one of the most driven person of people I've met
Oh,
actually.
wow. Thank you.
I mean, you're just such a hustler. I love it. Can you talk a bit about your Orange Pill story then? Because I think that'd be very interesting for people to hear about how you discovered Bitcoin and why you got so enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, so I 100% recognize how lucky I am in that regard. I'm very lucky to have discovered Bitcoin in my 20s. And the fun fact about this is, unlike most people who are trying to get a job in Bitcoin after they've orange pill, they've become a Bitcoiner for a long time. I My story was the other way around. So I got a Bitcoin job with no knowledge or no experience absolutely in the Bitcoin space. I got a Bitcoin related job and I became a Bitcoiner along the way. So it happened during my time doing my master's degree in the UK. It was during COVID. I was trapped in this little dorm room. And at this time, I was doing my freelance practice on the area of marketing and PR, which was what aligned with my study anyways. And I was hired, interestingly, by Lena Seiche. She's the creator of the Little Hustler, the famous comic, Bitcoin comic, and the plushie, the toys. And you literally see them everywhere nowadays. So she hired me. That was prior to her day of running the Little Hustler. So we worked together for a year. And basically, she was the first Bitcoiner that I knew. And at some point, she said, "Oh, let me know when you're ready to receive your payment in Bitcoin." And the first time I heard that, I thought to myself, "Oh, yeah, right." But in a few weeks' time, I'm like, "Actually, can we actually discuss the proposal?" But yeah, that's how I started in Bitcoin, because in marketing and PR, you really have to understand what you're saying to do a good job. You really have to understand the concept to come up with effective messaging. So, due to necessity, I basically went on a steep learning curve, from blockchain 101 to understanding what Bitcoin really is. And that took me a few months, even work in the job on a daily
Mm,
basis. But once I realized the factor, or the impact Bitcoin can bring to personal sovereignty and freedom, that's
mm.
when I was finally really convicted, because I grew up as a freedom maximalist. I wasn't a happy child growing up and feeling a little bit different and just not understood by my peers. And I've always had this urge of feeling a little bit guilty for how privileged my upbringing was. So I would watch TV, and sometimes I would watch news and see these African children with no water and electricity. And I'd feel guilty because I belong to the one child generation in China. And my parents, they've always loved and supported me greatly. And I have this sense of guilt to when I see other people suffering, other places in the world. And I thought to myself, what difference do we have? I think it was just me was born in this family and they were born in that family, and I just got lucky. And I could have same ended up in the same spot, or anybody could be in that same situation. And I felt guilty for being privileged in that sense. I know I probably
I
shouldn't be.
Can we unpack that a little bit then? Because are you saying that because you grew up under that one child policy that you felt that actually there was a benefit to that in terms of your childhood, that you had more focus from your parents and more resource? Like, do you view that as a positive?
I think I wouldn't say it's a positive. I think it was what it is. The fact that I was the only child in the family, and my family wasn't particularly like wealthy or anything, and the fact that I was the only child, I had their undivided attention, and they both
Mm,
went. My parents, they both go to work. They're both working. So if we had more kids growing up, then the care or the support I received might be less. And then I really don't have a reference point, to be honest, because all of my peers are single child. Um, I didn't have much access to people have siblings anyways. And growing up, I didn't know that wasn't the thing in other places. Like growing up, I thought having one kid per household is perfectly normal because that's that's all the family that I have access to, right?
yeah, that's really fascinating. So what made you feel that you were different then? Like, what was it about your childhood that made you feel like you didn't fit in?
Well, I was always a little bit more mature among my peers, and in my teenage years, I started to think about things like who am I? And I grew up being a good student. I was really well behaved. I never caused any trouble. I wasn't particularly rebellious, even through the teenage years. Um, and I was thinking about these things of who am I? Like I feel like I'm living in other people's expectations. I'm trying to make my parents proud. I'm trying to stand out in my peers. I'm trying to get good grades. But among all of these things that I'm trying to do, like are what are the things that defines who I am? That's the question I was asking myself, and I couldn't find the answer. And I felt this sense of restriction, and I couldn't tell what was wrong at the time. And I think in hindsight, I feel like maybe it was because I wasn't given enough freedom, or in the society itself, like there was a lot of pressure from all directions, from school, from family, from your
Mm,
peers. There's a sense of what you're supposed to be doing at any given time. And oftentimes it wasn't spoken. Most of the
mm,
times it's not spoken, but you just feel the pressure around you, and other people are complying to that way. And I don't sometimes, if I don't feel like doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, then I have to go through tremendous pressure or stress, both from the external world or internal world, to actually pursue that. So that kind of led to my reckoning of, oh, like what if I can go abroad for my university? And the first time I talked to my parents about it was like 14 years old. um
mm.
I remember it till this day. We were at a hot pot place and we are having dinner, and I just casually brought it up, and the atmosphere, the conversation got like heated, and they were like, don't think about it. Absolutely not. Just forget about it and just do your school, and we'll figure this out later. Maybe it's good if you go out for a master's degree, because that's what my cousin did, and they think it worked out for her. But if you want to go out for undergrad, we can't let you do that. So I was like, okay, but I didn't forget about it. And then at just before I was like first year high school. And then I was thinking about the same thing again. And so this time was the time that I really started to put more actions into it, because I was a little bit older, was more thoughts in my head, I guess. And the wish grow much stronger. So I ended up writing a 40,000 word letter for my parents, and I hid it in the house. And I faked a sleepover with I talked to my cousin, so I had a sleepover with her. And after dinner time, and I thought, oh, okay, this is like after dinner time, they're around, and I texted them and say, hey, I left you something, read through and let me know what you think. That was like the 40,000 words letter. And then I was communicating how basically the things I wasn't able to tell them in the past like 16 years. It was in the letter. And I shared with them that this is something I really wanted to do. I'm confident that this is something I can do. And I want to be able to choose my own life path, basically. And the life path that I can see here is not what I'm interested in, but of course, in less strong wording. And I was just sharing how I felt like as a kid growing up and shared this urge of wanting to find myself and become myself. I haven't read that letter for years, actually. But that was the gist of it. And they read the letter and they thought, oh, wow, you really want to do this. And if this is what you want and you think this is going to make you happy, we're going to support you. And the original plan was to uh, go abroad for grade 12 and then do the exam to go to university from Canada. And then it didn't happen because just before I got accepted to a school, I applied for myself. So I did everything that I could because my parents don't speak English. And just before we have to put the nail in the wall, it's really happening. My mom asked me again and said, are you sure you want to do this? Are you ready? And I thought to myself, I'm not ready because I was so stressed and I was so anxious. And if I were to be completely honest to myself, I wasn't mentally or physically ready. And I knew that
Hmm.
if I took that opportunity, even if I could, then it could end up being a disaster just because I'm not heading into this with the right headspace.
What were you not ready about? Was it the fact of being abroad, or like what was the piece that was, I guess, daunting for you?
Um, Now that I think about it, well, first it was very intuitive. So for me, how I function is that it it takes a long time for me to decide on anything. But once I'm decided, then there's no going back. Then I'm like very committed. And another thing is that whatever I do, I need to be ready for it to really have that conviction and to have that commitment. Otherwise, it's way easier to quit, right? So it was more of an intuitive feeling that I don't feel like I'm ready for this. And in hindsight, it almost feel like I had an exterior motive. I had a alternative motive to escape from what I had. So it was more about escaping instead of pursuing. But at the same time, it
Mm.
should be about pursuing. Like you shouldn't be pursuing something just for the sake of avoiding the other option. And
Yeah.
deep down
So
in myself,
did you finish your undergrad in China then? Was that where you actually did it?
no, I finished my grade 12 in China and I did the entrance exam, which is really brutal in China because what there's a lot of emphasis and significance in the school, like the university entrance exam. So basically for my grade 12, my schedule was like this. I would go to school like 7 a.m 7:30 in the morning, and then the school runs until 6:30 p.m, and then I'll go home, have some downtime, and do my homework until maybe like any point between 12 to 2 a.m and do the whole thing again. And then you have school 6 days a week. So for my school, it's not even that hardcore. And I wasn't even remotely the most hardworking student. But even for my school and for my own style, that was my schedule. So you had people who had way crazier sleeping schedule and they were constantly studying 24/7, 7 days a week for a long time. And then you do the exam. And I ended up doing really well in the exam. There were like 30,000 people that are in my curriculum in my city. And I was number 150. So it was like 0.5%. And I ended up got into really good business school, like the best major in my city. It's like 30-minute bus ride, very easy. And my parents asked me again, like, are you gonna give that up? And the promise I made to them is that I can stay for grade 12 and that's what I'm gonna do. And I'll do the exam and use the exam grade to apply for university overseas because I had that option. But even if I got in the best ever schools in China, I'm still gonna leave. And they said okay. So that was the deal, like 1 year ago, right? So when they asked me, "Are you gonna give this up? Like, are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, I'm sure. I need to go." So I ended up doing undergrad in Canada, West Coast Canada, and then that's kind of basically launched my adulthood. So I've really had the opportunity that I'm really, really grateful for being able to be fully independent, not financially, of course, for a long time, but independent as my own person in this world ever since 18 years old. And that's a great experience, and that teaches you how to make decisions for yourself. There's no one to look after you. Your parents and family are like across the world and they don't speak the language. If you end up in some sort of pickle, you better figure out how to get out of it, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. So I guess then you worked for Lena, you kind of got into Bitcoin as a result of doing that. And then what did your Bitcoin career trajectory look like from there then? Can you talk a bit about that and how that developed over time?
Yeah, so I was working mostly with marketing and PR, and there are many great names that I've had the privilege to work with and help them grow. So the majority of my work comes with doing marketing and PR in emerging markets. So these are companies that come to me and say, "Hey, we're looking to enter emerging markets like Latin America, like Asia, Africa, basically non-English speaking regions." That's really hard to find, especially in this realm. Even for PR agency and marketing agencies in general, most of them, the majority of them are focused on North America and Europe. There are very few agencies out there, like my own, to really focus on these emerging markets. And oftentimes these Bitcoin companies, big or small, they're running very lean in the sense that they don't necessarily have the resources or time and effort to really hire locally and manage everything from in-house. So basically, I come in as a third-party partner to facilitate that process. So in the end, they will come to me and say, "Vivian, we want to enter the market of Africa. Make it happen for us." So I eventually become this problem solver role on their speed dial. And whenever they want to get something done, they're like, "Make it happen," and I figure out somehow, right?
Nice, good skill to have. So can you talk about how you transitioned then from working for Lena into that? Like what did that look like and what skills did you learn and how did that evolve into sort of doing this for multiple Bitcoin companies?
Yeah, I think I'm very lucky in the sense that I was granted this opportunity to work on these in the first place. Because if you think about a traditional industry, like for people that are my age in their 20s, it's very rare for them to take on a leadership role to this extent, and to really manage and take ownership of a lot of complex tasks. And this is what I love about Bitcoin is that it's not necessarily, there's very little bureaucracy. If you can do the job, it's your job, right? It's not about you have to have. It's less about if you have to have X years of experience. Like this is what I find it's weird because when I was first looking for a job right after university, all of the entry level jobs require 2 years of experience. And it's just how do you get it's chicken and egg, right? How do you get 2 years of experience of all the entry level roles require 2 years of experience? It's
I'll
just
tell you why. There's
counterintuitive.
a very simple reason for that is because basically people have templates and all they do is they just put the template out. So it's not like every role they're creating it. When they go and hire, they just have a template and they fill in the boxes. And it usually has 2 years experience or 5 years experience. There's a really funny, I can't remember what the technology was again, but it was a post on Reddit. There was a job posting for some particular role in a particular technology. And there was this guy that like sort of faux applied for it for the job, but he posted the thing to back to the HR and he said, "I'm actually the inventor of this." So let's say they were asking for like 5 years experience, and he said, "I'm actually the inventor of this technology, and it's only been around for 3 years."
Yeah, that happens. So you see the struggle from a job seeker perspective and how much ladder they have to climb to get to where they want to be. So um I was definitely lucky in that sense. And I sort of got pushed in different situations where it's my responsibility all of a sudden. And I have to really push myself and learn as fast as I can to rise up to the challenge. And then I guess that eventually led to this whole podcast production is the past few years because I'm on the I'm on the marketing and PR side. So I'm usually the person who reach out to conferences, podcasts, media to pitch my clients and try to get them speaking opportunities. And for the longest time, I was very happy doing that. But in the back of my mind, I've always been thinking like, so what else can I do for the community? What else can I contribute? And I wanted to have something of my own, but I couldn't decide on what. I didn't know what would be the best direction, and I didn't want to force it. And I thought to myself, there's so many great speakers, there's so many knowledgeable and wise people in the industry of technology or economics, and these normal common topics you hear people talk about on Bitcoin podcasts or conferences. I'm not a specialist or I'm not an expert in any of these areas, and if I were to become one, then it feels super forced, and I wouldn't be comfortable to do that. I wouldn't be confident enough to be in that position. And then one day the light bulb went off, I guess. I thought, oh, well, there's so many great speakers in the space, but maybe there are not enough great moderators. And the other observation I had is that everybody seemed to complain that there's not enough women in Bitcoin. And I think I attest to that. I attest to that. But I think there's a reason. I have a hypothesis why this is the case. So the fact that right now the majority of Bitcoiners are male, it means they're only capable of producing male-orientated content, which is nothing wrong with it, and it's fairly natural. But women and men, we approach the world very, very differently. Like we look through the world through different lenses. There's a lot more emotions and storytelling and intuition comes into it. And the current group of Bitcoiners, even if we have more and more of them, I still feel like most of them are either into economics or technology. But I see people in my real life that they're not necessarily interested in either, but how they live their lives, their personal growth, their choices, trajectories, and principles already perfectly aligned with the Bitcoin ethos. So basically, they're Bitcoiners, they just don't know it yet. And I avoid saying that line because it sounds very condescending. So I try to, and I think to myself, how can I say this without saying it? How can I say you're already a Bitcoiner, you just don't know it, without pointing fingers? And
I think, to be honest, my view is everybody's a Bitcoiner. They just don't know it yet. In the same way that everyone's an interneter, but maybe 30 years ago they didn't know it yet. It's just a technology that we will all be using. And I think there are people who are very kind of passionate about it because they see the potential for it and the benefits that the application has. And I think the general population just hasn't adopted it. But I mean, I think everybody will be a Bitcoiner. It's just a case of when you start using the network, really. It's just more of a timeline. I think to your point about the women, though, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's also the fact that just from a biological perspective, men are very kind of, testosterone is like very much a driver for status building and being very public about things and risk taking. And I think a lot of men come into this space and they want to have their voices heard. I mean, when I started in the Access Tribe podcast and focusing on women in the Bitcoin space, I found that there were way more women in this space than I had realized. And many of them are quite reluctant to come out and be public, even though they've done an immense amount of work in the Bitcoin space. And you get men oftentimes who've produced much less, and this is not to denigrate them in any way, like everyone's contributing, but they might have actually produced much less proof of work. But they'll talk about it and they'll come on a podcast and they'll be whatever. You just don't see that so much with women. They're much more in the background.
Yeah.
And yet, when you look at some of the great companies and some of the great products that get put out there, they're very often, if it's not a woman driving it, it's a woman that's doing a lot of the legwork in the background, like the operational mechanics to make things happen. So that's been my observation. But I'm actually really pleased to see that there's a lot of more female-focused podcasts coming out, like yourself, like Tally Lindenberg's. It's just great that all of these voices are getting heard more. And like you say, it's a different kind of story. It's a different kind of take. And I think it just plays to a different audience. But I mean, it's fantastic what you're doing. Definitely fantastic. I think one thing as well I would love to see more is like your generation talking. I realized, by the way, why I was already following you on Twitter. It was because I'd interviewed Ella and I realized you guys were both involved in the same project. I mean, that kind of stuff with like that demographic is so fascinating. And I think it really kind of like it just it feels very optimistic to me because I just think, wow, there are these people now coming out of universities and starting their careers and they really understand this stuff and really care about it. So I think definitely even more of your generation's voices will be awesome.
Well, technically, I'm not necessarily in the same generation of Ella because I'm not actually involved in the project she's involved in, but she was my guest and came on the show. And we knew each
Ah,
other from other channels with Natalie's book club. So we're both members of that book club.
oh,
So we
okay.
knew each other, and she's on my show. I almost well, there's some definitions out there that I am a Gen Z, but most of the definitions that didn't include me. But still, like very lucky to have stumbled upon Bitcoin in my 20s. And I think it just saved me tons of effort and time to find a career and find a lifestyle that's worth to devote myself for a lifetime. And this is a great opportunity and privilege to have. And this is why at least younger generation should know enough about Bitcoin and to make a conscious decision with enough information if they want to be in Bitcoin or not, instead of just be blissfully ignorant, I guess, and to later on regret not learning about it, because regret is one of the worst thing that you can never have and feel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that some people have quite an aversion to it. They're like, I just don't want to get excited about it and get involved. And I just think to myself, no, you're kind of missing out on being on that early adoption curve. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that it's had on your life then? I mean, you've been in Bitcoin sort of relative to your age, I guess, for a reasonable amount of time and being quite deep in the industry. Like, what's the impact that it's had for you in terms of your understanding of the ecosystem that you live in? And have you done anything differently as a result of knowing about Bitcoin?
Oh yeah, 100%. I told you about my aversion of tragic news growing up. So how I coped with the guilt was I ended up just unsubscribe to all the news overall. So I didn't growing
That
up.
just feels like a good strategy in general.
Yeah, I just disassociated myself with a lot of realities, and as part of my personality, like I have a lot of hobbies that are done by myself and on the creative side, and I just delve into these and just forget about a lot of the things that are actually going on, and choose not to pay attention because I'm very sensitive to the energy around me. So if I consume these depressing content, then me myself get depressed. So I just disassociated with that and kind of escape from reality whenever I can. It was until Bitcoin that I started to pay attention of what's happening in the world again, is because now I feel like I can make a difference. Now I feel like I can put my work out there to share with people that you have options. You don't have to just suck it up.
Yeah.
Because for me, freedom, I'm a freedom maximalist. Is There's so many things that I have historically given up for freedom, or for more flexibility in general, and I've made peace with that. And it hurts me to think about how there are people out there who just don't have options or don't realize that they do have options. And Bitcoin is that. Bitcoin is a tool that can guide all of us becoming more free, becoming more sovereign. I don't think it's the end. A lot of people think, oh, like once we reach hyper Bitcoinization, our job is done. I don't think so, because you see, there's so many Bitcoiners out there who are not happy still. So this goes to show that, having Bitcoin is not enough. This is a tool, this is a starting point. This is now we have the sound money to properly equip us to actually go after the things that we want. And now we actually have the time saved by Bitcoin to pursue and really think about who we are and how do we become ourselves. We're all on this journey of becoming ourselves. And historically, because we didn't have sound money, we had to put way more effort and time into preserving our wealth to put food and roof above our head and on the table. But now Bitcoin has freed us tremendous amount of resources in ourselves to pursue things. So it just made me tune back into reality, and tune back to being more analytical, I think, to look into real world problem and think how I can contribute instead of just being a creative, sitting on the sideline. So that's a major change. And the other major change is that, I guess it's the concept of having low time preference. I'm someone who's very in the moment. That's It's kind of pessimistic of me to think that, because I never assumed that I have a future. Even growing up, like I never, like I never. It's not like I think about death a lot. It's just I just hate to be disappointed so much to the point that I just don't expect myself to be alive in 6 months' time or 10 years time. So I live life very momentarily. And one thing that I absolutely try to avoid is to have regrets. So um I live my life in this manner, but this I can miss out on things because I'm not a typical planner. I'm a very spontaneous person. I'm very in the moment. I'm present. But if you don't plan ahead, then that can hurt you. So I guess the existence of Bitcoin and being in the community kind of pull me a little bit towards the more balanced scale rather than being quite extreme on the spontaneous and present side, which is also good. It's just, but balance is something that we as humans are we really need to pursue balance in all things in life. And I think if you can really find a balance in everything, then that's the only thing we need to do as humans to really have a good life, if you think about it. Because all of the scales, if you're more extreme on one side, then you start to get your thinking start to get clouded and you get tunnel vision, and that's going to ultimately hurt you. But balance is something that I try to achieve with or without Bitcoin, and Bitcoin certainly helps in that regard.
Do you think if you had known about Bitcoin, or if Bitcoin had been around for a bigger portion of your life, do you think you might have done anything differently in the decisions that you've made?
No.
No.
This is what I meant by no regrets, right? No, I don't think so. I'm Combined with that, I'm a very intuitive person. I have something in the back of my mind of something that I want or don't want, and oftentimes it is done through trying something out and realize that I don't want it, and kind of narrow down your subset of things, and then you have to pick and choose what you want from a way smaller subset, which is an easier problem to work through than having all of the options and not knowing where to start, right? So I think I'm still in the process, and I think I am exactly where I need to be. I understand everybody thinks that they're late in Bitcoin, but I also think that it's no use to worry about things that you can't change. And this is, if you choose to adapt the narrative of, oh, I'm in Bitcoin too late, then you will end up in this self-blame. Oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. I should have looked into this
If
sooner.
only
Or I
I
should have.
had.
Yeah, and then that mindset is just not productive, and it doesn't do any good for you to think that way. So I just choose to not subscribe to that narrative and say, okay, I'm very lucky to be in Bitcoin for the way I did, and I wouldn't have hoped otherwise. And if it wasn't for this job, I probably wouldn't have been in Bitcoin for another 5 years because it's so technical and I'm not a numbers person. This is partially why I wanted to start a podcast is I want to be able to lower the barrier of entry for Bitcoin content. Because let's face it, like if I'm someone who's not interested in technology or economics, I'm not going to sit down for 2 hours and watch an interview that I have absolutely no interest in. It's just the truth. And we shouldn't blame people for that because we're just like that. Where if I'm not a math nerd, I'm not going to sit down and watch a theoretic physicist interview with some space person for like 2 hours. It's just not my area of interest. And I think nobody is a Bitcoiner at birth besides the baby boom in Bitcoin right now. But nobody, we all go through this learning curve, and once upon a time we weren't Bitcoiners, and I feel like we need more compassion for people that are not yet Bitcoiners. So my way of trying to bring them out to the ecosystem is by talking about personal transformations and talking about how our values and beliefs have changed because of Bitcoin, so that people can see, oh, like Bitcoiners are humans too, and they have to go through relationship problems, they have to get groceries and put food in themselves to stay healthy. We do the same thing. We have a lot in common than I realized. And if I agree with her on X amount of things she said, and she's a Bitcoiner, maybe I should look into Bitcoin. Like, I want to plant that seed in their mind, because I do sense that I tweeted the other day, like, I haven't met any Bitcoiner whose life wasn't changed by Bitcoin.
Mm.
And it's as simple as that.
I
So
think it's quite hard for people outside of the community to really kind of, how can I put it, understand that, because I think when people sort of really, really understand Bitcoin and really then get into it, and like you say, become very changed by it, very passionate about it, I think to those outside of that experience, it looks quite strange. It's almost cultish. It's like, oh,
yeah.
you've just gone down this crazy rabbit hole and now you're obsessed with this weird thing. And on the face of it, it just sounds quite boring. It's like, this distributed digital ledger, like secured by compute power. Great. It just seems like such a bland topic. And I remember the first
Yeah.
time I found out about Bitcoin, I'm embarrassed to say it was 2011. It was my husband that told me about it. And he described it really excitedly to me. And I just looked at him and I went, that sounds really boring. Like, I don't understand why you're so excited about it. And he was really excited about it for a project he was working on with a friend, which then in the end, like, ended up getting dropped and life took over. And he sort of, I guess, lost interest somewhat in Bitcoin. But when I actually understood it, despite having been under my nose for like most of my life, when I actually got what it meant, I was just like, oh wow, this is actually the most incredible thing I've really ever seen, because it just impacts everything. And I think that's why you see such a diverse community in Bitcoin as well, because there's almost something in it for everybody, like whatever cause or issue you really care about, whatever, I don't know, lifestyle you have. I was thinking about it the other day and thinking, like, how do you describe a typical Bitcoiner? And you can't really. There's like climate activists, there's libertarians, there's people that are into guns, people that are into meat, people that are into yoga. Like, the community is just so diverse. Intellectuals, business owners. Everybody seems to have this angle that when they discover it, they're like, this is just incredible. And the applications for it incredible. And then the weirdest thing is you have these very diverse communities that suddenly have a lot in common and really kind of get along. Like, you can almost meet a Bitcoiner in any circumstance and be like, you're going to get on with that person, even if you've
Yeah,
got a completely
100%.
different lifestyle. It's crazy. It's really the weirdest thing. Weirdest thing. Um, I was curious about then, like, your kind of journey, because you've done some recruitment as well. So you've done marketing, you've done recruitment and everything else. Can you talk a bit about the Bitcoin industry as you see it from that perspective in terms of its maturity? Like, what do you think about it in terms of an ecosystem and where it is on its journey from a professional standpoint, I guess?
Right. So I'm not a professional recruiter per se. Like, I started recruiting
Who
was
is
hiring
Vivian?
my own
Who
team.
is?
I started recruiting for my own company and rigorously hired many roles over 12 months. And when you actually have to work with the people you hire on a daily basis, then you really get to test your hypothesis. Because people like job seekers, sometimes they're amazing at interviews and they just whoosh you, and you're like, oh, I have to have this person right away, and this happens. And then sometimes they end up being not so great in their job, and then you have vice versa, like people who are not so great in interviews but they can really pull through some great work. And the other, so I really got to test my hypothesis over time, and that gave me some clarity and experience of what to look at. And because it's such a new industry, and I know that there's so many people are looking for a job in Bitcoin, and this is what I've found. I've tried two routes when it comes to hiring for specific roles. One route is that they have a lot of experience in the responsibility that they actually have to fulfill, but they have zero knowledge and zero experience in Bitcoin. Well, they
Mm.
have heard of Bitcoin, but they haven't been interested in, they haven't really learned much, but they seem to be able to really qualify for the role they're supposed to do. And then you have a second subset, which are people who are attuned in the Bitcoin community. They're Bitcoiners, but in terms of the responsibility itself, maybe they're less experienced, or maybe they've never really done that. I've tried to hire people from both subsets, and what I've realized is that the first subset actually works better than the second, with a catch. The catch is, if the first subset of people who are very skilled in whatever responsibility they have, and they once they get the job, they really immerse themselves into learning about Bitcoin, into actively becoming a Bitcoiner, and immerse themselves into the information that's available out there, then these are the type of people who would get really great over time. And these are my best people. And versus if they're Bitcoiners and they come in the job, yes, they have all the industry knowledge. Yes, they're attuned to what's going on in the field. But if they cannot have the strong work ethic to learn, to gain experience of the actual responsibilities, then they don't perform as well as the first group. So whenever I hire from the first group, I would be very blunt with them and say, listen, I would be really I would be really glad to have you on board. However, this is a new industry. It's a very specific industry, and if you were to take this job at all, you need to make a commitment of actively learning about it, um, actively immerse yourself in this field. So if you're just going to clock on, clock off, do your job, and without putting much more thoughts into it, eventually I will have to let you go, because eventually you just wouldn't be able to keep up from what I've experienced. So unless you can make the commitment and are willing to learn more about this, then you shouldn't take it. I would be very, very blunt and very honest. So they would come into the job with expectation of, I'm expected to learn, I'm expected to grow, and I want to. I think that the most important
Yeah,
thing is
I
that
love
they
it.
want to.
I love it because you're orange pilling one hire at a time.
Yeah.
It's like you can have this job, but you need to study Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like you're going out to date people and say, oh, I would only date Bitcoiners. So if you want to date me, just you better become a Bitcoiner. It's the same mentality, right? Because I don't have time to handhold every single aspect of the nuance of the industry. There's so much to learn, and I'm not even an expert in many of these areas. So they need to take the initiative. And what I've realized is that if I put that disclaimer there and I lay down the expectation really well, then oftentimes for those people who choose to come on board, they really start to thrive in their role after they get a grasp of what it's about and become passionate Bitcoiners themselves.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you. I think there's very much a focus in the industry of wanting to hire Bitcoiners and less to hire for the skills that you actually need. And it's a bit like saying, I don't know. I mean, it's not quite the same because there's a different ideology, but it's a bit like saying, I don't know, like I'm hiring a operations manager for I don't know, a surfboard company, and they have to be a
Mhm.
surfer. Like, why? They don't, like, they're just running the operation. So yeah, I tend to agree with you. I mean, ideally, if in an ideal world, if you can get both, that's great. That just doesn't always happen. So
Yeah, yeah, totally. You have so many constraints. You have the budget, and oftentimes I need to hire in emerging markets, which means I have to look for people who are attuned to cultural nuances in with whatever area they're in, and then they have to speak flawless English, and that is hard enough oftentimes.
mm.
And being in Bitcoin, it's such a new industry and it's so specific. You just don't have the luxury to hit every box on your list, and you have to make compromise somewhere and work with the constraints. And over time, what I've realized is that if you have good work ethics, and have some track record of the responsibility, for me at least, I wouldn't it's not a deal breaker if they weren't a Bitcoiner. However, I would say if you are a Bitcoiner already, then it actually gives you more head start than you realize, because then you're saving your employer so much time to handhold you for the
Yeah.
introduction of the industry. But the catch here is that the fact that you're a Bitcoiner will never be more important than being a good team member. So the work ethic, communication skills, being able to work independently and
Yeah.
collaboratively, these will always be the most important thing in any industry, not just in Bitcoin.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very well said. So which route do you think you're going to pursue now? Because you're doing really well, I think, with your podcast and fantastic content. You've got your marketing skill set, and then you've also got your recruitment skill set. So next year is going to be an interesting year for you because with the halving coming, the expected bull run, like all of the kind of focus around, the ETFs and all that kind of stuff, whichever opinion you have about that. But it's going to be a really interesting year for you because you've got a few options of where you might start to focus your energy. So what's your kind of prediction, or where, I know you don't like to plan ahead, but where do you think you'll be heading next year?
Well, first of all, I will definitely continue to pump out the content as I do. I've been very deliberate on the timeline of the show. It's a bi-weekly show. This is a timeline where I feel like I can commit to consistently without making it a chore, because I still want to have fun in everything that I do. And this is very important because I need to actually get excited about the things I'm working on to be able to do a good job. And it's probably not the
Yeah.
best trade ever because it hinges your ability to work on anything, right? You have to be selective. But I do believe that direction is more important than speed. And I want to use this phrase to encourage everybody who's had a hard year, who's looking to their next breakthrough, and who's kind of frustrated on things not going as fast as they think it should. I do want to say that direction is 100% more important than speed, because if you pick the wrong direction, no matter how fast you go, you're just going to be further and further from what you want, where you want it to be. So really take time to reflect on what is the thing that you want, and plant seeds in that direction and see what sprouts and nurture it. So this year have been like quite bearish. So I've actually had the time to properly reset, and to take a good rest. So now I'm like ready to take on new projects. I actually don't know. I think I will, for me, right now I've more become a problem solver. So it's almost like instead of picking an area to focus on, I'll just keep talking to people and connecting to others and see if there's any initiatives that I'm super passionate about and I can contribute in any way. Either
Mm,
that's through the show or through the recruitment service or through the marketing and PR service, anything that I find myself passionate about and we have like good synergy together with whatever project, then I'm not afraid of introducing myself to them and say, this is what I've done. How can I contribute? So it's not really on a focus in area, it's more of a focus in project and in missions and uh, challenges that I gravitate towards naturally. And I'm very excited about next year too, because it's supposed to be a better year in the market, and I believe that will be the case. And I'm already start to see the market start to pick up, and I'm receiving interest of, oh, what can we do in these markets? So that's great to see. And then it's just a matter of time to see what actually come to fruition. So right now I'm also very excited,
that's
but it's going to be
amazing.
more about the projects. Yeah.
That's a fantastic positive note. I wanted to ask you a little bit as well, because you've obviously been focusing so much on like emerging markets. Like, what's your sense of Bitcoin adoption there and the general kind of view about Bitcoin? How do you see it in contrast to the Western world or Asia even?
I Right. I would say, in my experience, people from North America and from Europe are the hardest one to orange pill, because they would just think the problem is too far away from them. Like they would think, oh, we have inflation, but it's under control. We have some difficulties, and the but it's really the developing world that's suffering more, and they just feel like it's nothing to do with them from the legacy countries. So I do feel like people from North America and Europe, if they're not already open-minded about Bitcoin, at least, then it's harder to orange pill them.
Sorry, I just love how you
Ultimately,
describe that, the legacy countries. I don't know if that was a Freudian slip, but that is hilarious. It's probably spot on, actually. The legacy countries. Oh my God, that could be
did I
patient.
make it up? I didn't make it up. No, it's a word, right?
I don't know. I've never heard it before, but it's actually kind of bang on. It feels like that. I mean, people keep talking about the sort of crumbling Roman Empire, but it does feel a little bit like that. Like a lot of these countries that were sort of doing quite well on paper, it's kind of like legacy countries now. Whereas I don't know, like regions like Africa are doing really well. Like you see lots of interesting activity happening in Latin America, with El
Mm,
Salvador making Bitcoin legal tender. I mean, and in the meantime, you sort of see places like Europe, which are just hyper regulating and suppressing innovation, and similar efforts happening in the US as well. So yeah, I like that.
yeah.
I always talk about the legacy media or the relic media, so now we can add the countries to it as well, the legacy countries.
Right, right. So I believe in the end of the day, it's gonna be easier to orange pill people through necessity. If they
Mm.
literally need Bitcoin to preserve their savings because there's literally no other options, they have to consider because it's out of necessity. I'm reading this book called The Mountain Is You. It's basically a book about transforming self-sabotaging energy into like self-productive energy. Like how do you do that? Why we self-sabotage? So things like that. And in one concept in that book, it particularly resonate with me in terms of orange peeling people, is saying people don't naturally gravitate towards happiness. People gravitate towards comfort. And if
Mm.
if if even if they're in a unhappy state, but it's comfortable, they would still choose to be in that state, versus they will only change if the cost of change is less uncomfortable to stay. So that's what we're seeing with North America and Europe. They maybe heard of Bitcoin, and a lot of them in the back of my mind may even think that it's actually legit, but it's just so uncomfortable to change. And it's so comfortable to stay in the status quo and fight this. Versus in Latin America, where emerging markets in general is completely the opposite. To stay in their status quo is way more painful than adapting a new technology. And to be honest, like in Bitcoin, we've come far enough to make onboarding process or acquiring a wallet, starting buying Bitcoin, like easy enough. So it's actually not that hard to get yourself on board, to start to get yourself on board to a Bitcoin standard.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a lot of those in emerging markets in general. And what I've heard so much, either from people in El Salvador or with a lot of adoption actively happening, is that their people are hopeful. Their people are generally have a lot of hope for the future, versus in a lot of other places, we see things are kind of going down and we don't know when the shit's gonna hit the fan really, and we're kind of scared and we're pessimistic about the future. And the hope aspect is it's very significant in our personal motivation. So that's another thing I've seen in Latin America or emerging markets in general.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. It's a very good point. That's interesting because I think you've got a lot more perspective than many people have on that, just in terms of your experience and your cultural exposure. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. I mean, that's a very positive note to end on. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do next year. You've done so much already, and I'm just super excited to see where this journey takes you. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you for having me. Had a great time.